Welcome back to another episode of NFL News on the Boomer Bust channel. I'm your host, Terry, and let me get right to it. This is wild. Like, I saw this news and I had to get on the mic. I don't think there's been NFL news, of course. I obviously probably could cover every single little thing, but I haven't. I like the quarter of the way or a third of the way through the season to kind of recap where we are. And then I'm going to do that when we're 2/3 through the season and, kind of update all that stuff. But for the most part, I don't think, unless it's something crazy, then I would cover it. And I just haven't really been doing that. And, I got limited time. But I saw this news today and I said I have to. I said I got to grab the mic. Now, admittedly, I'm off work, so it's easier to do that. But I was like, I need to get on the mic because the Indianapolis Colts have hired Jeff Saturday as their interim head coach. Now, if you are a subscriber to the channel, a fan or whatever, you know that I consistently talk about how silly it is to fire coaches in the middle of the season unless there is something really terrible going on with that coach and they need to get out. Other than that, I don't see the benefit. I've never heard a good reason for it. And so when they fired Frank Wright, I already had my eyebrows raised, but I just happened to be on Twitter at the time and I saw that it was like Jeff Saturday's our new head coach. I'm like, wow, that's clearly a troll account. And it was Jim Irsay and it had a blue check. And I'm like, wait a minute, there's no way that this is real. This can't be real. And then I saw the NFL tweeted out. I'm like, yo, this is insane. So a long time ago, I started to talk about how the NFL was acting like the NBA. And I talked about, owners of people too, with more social media, more, access to the internet and all that. They are consuming more information as well. I mean, yes, there's plenty of rich people that could kind of bury their heads in the sand. But obviously, if you own an NFL team, you're not that type of rich person, more than likely. And so they obviously hear from the other owners, but they hear from plenty of fans. If they engage with their team, they hear from plenty of fans. And like I said, with social media, now they're getting tweeted at and all these different things. So there's so much more info that you're taking in. And I started to see the owners become less patient. And I said back then, this is a bad sign. And the fans were one thing. They all, fans are going to be like that. And the fans used to be more patient too, but they were the first ones to be like, fire them, cut this guy, start the backup. Stupid stuff. And then you slowly start to see the owners do the same thing because they're not football people. The majority of them are not football people. And so, yes, they're like fans where it sounds good, but they have the power to do it. And so we started to see coaches get fired early. You never saw a coach get fired early unless it was something crazy. Like, we always talk about Black Monday for a reason. That Monday after the season is when you fire a coach. And not just because, that's what we do, this is how we do it, but because the season's over. It makes sense to fire the coach then. They have done what they had to do. You knew you're moving on. You probably talked to him. Okay, fine. And there's a respect thing. There's a tradition thing. But it also is just logical. Once we started seeing coaches get fired prior to Black Monday, I was like, we're turning into the NBA. The NBA, a very long time ago, got into the business of firing coaches willy-nilly. Sometimes you get more than one head coach fired in a year. We had coaches fired after the first game. Steve Nash just got fired after 5-7 games. You had, I believe it was Mike Brown that just won a championship or just went to the finals, got fired the first game or whatever after. It's stupid stuff. And I said, we're turning into that. Now, since then, we're talking about 7 years ago. Since then, or maybe even more than 7 years ago, we've started to see the NFL do that. They just fire coaches for no reason. Now, you got the Panthers who fired their coach, Steve Wilkes, who was a head coach before and seemed to be pretty good, I guess, to them. They wanted to give him a chance and give him an audition. A lot of times it don't happen like that. I mean, you got guys like Urban Meyer, who didn't really get fired in the middle of the season, but probably should have. You had him, and then, you know, they didn't really scramble because it was the end of the season. They found a new coach. But he had to go because it was crazy circumstances. You had John Gruden under fire. That's crazy circumstances. You got an interim guy who did well and didn't even get a shot, but he had to step into the fire. That's what it used to be. Now it's just like, we're just going to fire you just to fire you. And I have not heard a good reason yet. Now, some people will say this gives you a jump start on a head coach, looking for the next head coach. How? Please tell me how. Because look, if you were to say, hey, Frank Wright, this is going terrible, and you haven't done it, you know, what you need to do in these years, this is probably going to be the last hoorah. You could start talking and researching right now. Like, just because you fired your coach, there's no magic rule that you can now start looking into other coaches. That's not how it goes. They don't have no rules. So you don't need to fire your coach in the middle of the season. But anyway, that's not the point. That was step one. That was one thing that has gotten worse over the years. But now we are crossing over into the worst part of the NBA. Speaking of Steve Nash, a player with no coaching experience anywhere turns around from retirement, gets a head coaching job. We saw it with Jason Kidd, which everybody was like, what is going on? We saw it with Derek Fisher, then Steve Nash. None of them ended up being that great. But still, this idea that, and again, the NBA basketball is a very different sport. I think it's very disrespectful to all the coaches that coach, but I don't see it as crazy because, and this is me speaking as a novice, but I know for a fact that superstar players impact the game a lot easier in the NBA than they do in the NFL versus the coach. It's just because you got a smaller amount of people on the floor and they play both sides. So having a Giannis can completely change your team. That is not the case in the NFL. We've seen superstar quarterbacks go through losing stretches because they just don't have a team around them. Football is a team sport, a big team sport. So the coaching really matters because not only do you have more players, but they're all different positions that do specific things. And so the coaching really matters. So this idea that you got a person who has never coached football, and he might have coached high school with his kids, I don't know, but we know for sure in the NFL and in college, he has never coached. Never. And people talk about the good old boys club, which I don't necessarily agree with or with coaching for football, but it is definitely a nepotism type position. As in your friends and family, that's how you get jobs. You get jobs with the coaches you know. And so once you do good work for them, they typically bring you along. And so you do have certain steps you got to go through. Whether or not you get, some high school experience or some lower level experience, okay. But you usually got to be a GA or some type of assistant at some point to do the grind. Doing the film breakdown, running the coffee, running all these different things. Then you graduate, you get more responsibility, potentially become an assistant coach. Like my first position that I would have had to do if I wanted to stay on my NFL path back in the day, I was supposed to be the assistant wide receivers coach, or like the assistant to the assistant wide receivers coach, and like the assistant special teams coordinator, where essentially I had to do a lot of film and help set up the drills for the special teams. Like, obviously that's not the crap I want to do, but that's like your first step. And then eventually you might get a position group, or you might jump and become a coordinator, like a run game coordinator, a pass game, whatever. Then you might, become a coordinator, and then you work your way up. So there's so many people out there on this grind. There's so many people that have been on this grind. There's guys that are 10 plus years vets who have yet to get a head coaching spot. And you give it to a person who has not had to coach. There's so much wrong with this that I'm not going to spend this whole video breaking it down. But the biggest thing besides the disrespect is that he has not been with the players. We are going into week 10. Week 10, whether he been around and people saw him or he talked to the team a couple times or he was on the sideline for some games, like that does not equal up to being the head coach. You cannot do this. I mean, I'm sure it's probably happened. Maybe somebody could tell me, but I can't remember a time where coach got fired, head coach, and they brought in an outside person in the middle of the season. The reason you get an intern from within is A, because you don't have time to completely change the philosophies and the schemes. But B, is because that's going to be somebody that they know. If you watch Hard Knocks, and I've been trying to stress this a lot lately, these are people. I guess with the internet age and Madden and all that and fantasy football, people really just act like they're just things. They're not things. These are people. And so people always like ask these questions about how they do things. They're just regular people. What at your job, if they do team building, what do they do? Or when you were younger and they had to do team building, or when you played sports and they tried to build, team chemistry, like different things, like coaches bring in people to talk to make them laugh. They have individual conversations, text messages with players, coaches that don't coach you, that have personalities. You might see them out in practice going crazy, or you might go joke with them. Or, sometimes the head coach might have the coaching staff get up there and do silly stuff or tell them about them. And so you watch Hard Knocks. That's probably the best example you get. The special teams coach, the running backs coach, or whoever, they know these players. They still know these players. They're still in the locker room together. They're still out on the field together. They're still, grinding together, even if it's not, the coach that coaches you. So when one of the coaches, especially the coordinator, becomes the HC, you know that person. And you're familiar with them and they're familiar with you. And they understand what's been built and what's been working, what hasn't been working. Doesn't mean they're going to fix it all, but they know what this team is. You're talking about bringing in a guy who has no clue who these people are as a team, and expect these grown men, not 18-year-olds, not 16-year-olds. You're expecting these 25-plus-year-olds to listen to this person, to be evaluated by this person, to be motivated by this person who has not been with them through the season. That is absolutely insane. And so I look at this move and it completely blows my mind. I don't remember seeing anything like it. And I mean, look, I'm not about to sit here and tell you the Colts are going to lose and all that stuff. I don't know. But from my perspective, I don't see how this goes well. I just don't see how this goes well. And so now we have the first owner, and we know Jim Irsay is a little different. Some of these owners are a little different, and so Jim Irsay is one of them. And so now we have the first owner to dip their toe in and say, screw it. Screw the resume, screw the credentials, screw the connections, screw the knowledge and all that. Let's just I like him. He played with us. He's a fan favorite. I like him. Let's make him the head coach. And rest assured, unless something crazy happens, this won't be the last time, because owners love to copy each other. And I hope it's the last time. I hope they really stop firing coaches in the middle of the season. I have yet to see one time where it has made any difference. And so I hope it all stops. Not to disrespect the NBA, but the NFL's not the NBA for a reason. And I don't want them to become the NBA. But right now, that's the territory we're stepping into. It's just the society we live in today. The facts don't matter. The science don't matter. The truth don't matter. None of it matters. Let's just do what we think is going to make a splash, and it's crazy to see. It's crazy to see. So anyway, that's it for me. Go down in the comment section. Let me know what you think about Jeff Saturday being hired by the Indianapolis Colts. Share it around, get the conversation started. Thumbs up, subscribe, and thank you for listening.